Okay. I'd like to call this meeting of the Steering and Policy Committee to order. I'm Debbie Wasserman Schultz. I am a member of Congress. I represent Florida's 25th Congressional District here in Broward County, the first all Broward County Congressional District in 40 years. Finally got our due here in Broward. I want to thank my colleagues, Leader Jeffries, Co-Chair Kildee of Michigan, Congresswoman Kelly of Illinois, Congresswoman Castor of Florida, and Congressman Soto Moskowitz, who will be joining us momentarily, and Frost of Florida, for making the trip here to Broward County, Florida. I also want to thank the Broward County Commission for allowing us to hold this first field hearing in their commission chamber. Thank you to Mayor Nan Rich, my dear friend, former Senate Minority Leader, and her staff, and all the commissioners and dedicated staff here. They have been amazing and incredible to work with, and it was fortuitous that this was not a meeting day for them, and it gave us the opportunity to borrow their hearing room. This committee meets weekly when we are in session. For those of you that are unfamiliar with what the Steering and Policy Committee's role is, we meet weekly when we are in session in Washington, but it's vital that we also hear from stakeholders and constituents who can't necessarily appear in the Capitol to testify or meet with us. So we took it on the road today so that we could make sure that we were able to hear from people in communities across the country, starting in South Florida. And I'm incredibly proud that our first field hearing is here in South Florida and on a topic that is timely with the ongoing threat to reproductive freedom here in our state and across our country. Like any hearing of the Steering and Policy Committee, we'll start with opening statements from the leader and the co-chairs of the committee. And for that purpose, I recognize myself for the making of my opening statement. Nearly 2 years ago, the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade and eroded over 50 years of legal precedent that protected a woman's reproductive freedom. This ruling unleashed an avalanche of far-right anti-choice policies with one clear goal: to ban abortion outright. This flawed Dobbs ruling positioned extremist politicians and judges, fueled by their hard right ideology, directly between women and their examination room and their health. It put judges and politicians in women's doctors' offices, at their pharmacy counters, and in their homes. It upended and invaded their right to privacy and their deeply personal space. Since that horrific decision, we've seen countless policies proposed and passed into law that interfere with our fundamental right to choose if and when to start a family. We see it with anti-abortion bans, some of them with only minimal or even no exceptions. We see it in proposals to bar medication abortions. It's showing up now with interference and confusion on access to in vitro fertilization and contraceptives. We also see it in anxiety among health professionals who fear for their ability to treat the patients in front of them. And it's causing real health threats right now, as we will hear, in all phases of emergency care for pregnancy complications. The list goes on, but I guarantee you the threats will not stop there. Just yesterday, the Florida Supreme Court bowed to extremist Republicans in Tallahassee and overturned precedent to allow the 15-week abortion ban here in Florida to stand. Because of their ruling, we are 29 days away from seeing a 6-week abortion ban take effect that the Republican-led legislature teed up to become law if their already draconian 15-week ban was allowed to stand. What this means for Florida women, in real terms, is that after May 1st, abortion care will become almost impossible to receive in Florida, with almost no exceptions. This will impact not only millions of women in the Sunshine State, but millions more across the South who face familiar bans and look to Florida for a semblance of reproductive freedom. But there is hope. Floridians will have a chance to make their voices heard this November and send these extremist policies back to the 20th century, where they should have stayed. Today's, thank you. I'm assuming there would be more than one person applauding. That's what Broward County is all about right there. Today's field hearing is a critical step to help highlight the dangerous reality that our reproductive freedoms are under siege. It will also demonstrate the devastating impact of these extreme policies for women and families across the nation. But the people of Florida loudly and overwhelmingly fought back by following our law to put a constitutional amendment on the ballot for voters that would limit government interference with this deeply personal choice of abortion. So now it is imperative that we finish the job and raise our voices higher collectively and share more of our stories to ensure our reproductive freedom is preserved in our state. And women across the South are counting on us as well. Hopefully, we'll see similar ballot measures emerge as it becomes clear that the vast majority of Americans, both right and left, support reproductive freedom. And today we'll shine a light on the advocates, medical professionals, and everyday people who suffer because of the dangerous, extreme policies that limit our freedom. The consequences of Dobbs are far-reaching. It placed women's lives and health at risk, and it created a climate of fear among healthcare providers, which reduces access to all forms of reproductive care. Sadly, we could fill an arena with people who have stories like what we will hear today. But unfortunately, Mr. Leader, because of a culture of retribution and bullying by our governor and the executive branch, there are a lot of potential witnesses who are afraid to step forward and share their stories today. And our freedom is the first casualty. Extreme post-Dobbs policies force women to travel to other states, lose time at work, or put their own health at risk. Doctors are forced to move to another state or discontinue services, as so many of them live in perpetual fear of criminalization and persecution and prosecution. In Florida and nationwide, extremists will continue to weaponize every legislative tool they can to control other people's lives, health, and bodies. Anti-abortion extremism erodes women's progress, ignores science, and tramples our constitutional rights. Therefore, it is my hope that today's hearing will paint a true picture of what is happening across America when we deny women's freedoms and bodily autonomy. It will tell us just what's at stake in this fight, and it will explain why Democrats and President Biden refuse to back down from any fight for our reproductive freedoms. It's rather simple. Patients, not politicians, should have the freedom to make their own healthcare decisions, full stop. Thank you. I yield back and recognize the distinguished gentleman, our leader of the Democratic caucus and our future speaker, the member from New York. The gentleman from New York's 8th District, Brooklyn proud, leader Hakeem Jeffries.
Good morning. It's an honor and a privilege to be with you all today on this incredibly important moment here in the great state of Florida. Let me thank my good friend and our distinguished colleague, the co-chair of the Steering and Policy Committee, Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who's doing an incredible job. I thank her for yielding, for her leadership, and for convening this incredibly important hearing. I also want to thank my other distinguished colleague, another co-chair of the Steering and Policy Committee, Congressman Dan Kildee from the great state of Michigan, as well as all of my incredible colleagues in Congress, Secretary Becerra, who we will hear from shortly, as well as these very important witnesses. Florida is now ground zero in the fight to protect the woman's freedom to make her own reproductive health care decisions. And as House Democrats, we are here to make clear that we stand with you to protect reproductive freedom. Let me acknowledge our witnesses here today and thank them all for their tremendous advocacy and support for reproductive freedom during this incredibly fragile moment here in Florida and across the country. We are here today to all make clear our unwavering, unyielding, and unequivocal support for reproductive freedom, because reproductive freedom is under assault. Today's hearing is incredibly important, particularly given the Florida Supreme Court's decision, as Congresswoman Schultz outlined, that will now trigger in less than 30 days, a 6-week abortion ban here in Florida. But the women of the state will have their voices heard in November with respect to an amendment that will make access to abortion a guaranteed right, and we stand with you in that effort. An extreme group of individuals in this state, led by the current governor, are prepared by almost any means to jam their radical right-wing ideology down the throats of the people of this state as part of an effort to try to impose a nationwide abortion ban. But we can stop them, we must stop them, and we will stop them together. Together we can stop them from criminalizing reproductive freedom. Together we can stop them from outlawing contraception. Together we can stop them from restricting IVF. Together we can protect reproductive health care. We will continue to stand with you to make sure that a woman has the freedom to make her own reproductive health care decisions, work with you to protect abortion care access, and stand with you to defend the women of this great state. We will continue to stand up for reproductive freedom. We will stand up for reproductive freedom today. We will stand up for reproductive freedom tomorrow. Together, we will stand up for reproductive freedom forever. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Leader Jeffries. Now I'd like to recognize my colleague and friend, the co-chair of the Steering and Policy Committee, Dan Kildee from Michigan.
Well, first of all, thank you, Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz, for your leadership on this issue and for hosting us here today and for having really fortuitous timing in terms of calling this hearing. And this could not come at a more important moment. I also want to thank Leader Jeffries for his leadership and for his presence here today, along with all my colleagues. And particularly, I want to thank the witnesses for being here, for being willing to share your perspective and your personal stories. Look, it's been said, but I'll say it again. Let's be clear. Your individual rights as Americans, including the right to health care, to abortion services, to IVF, and even something as fundamental as the right to decide when you want to start a family, those rights are under attack. 2 years ago, 5 conservative Supreme Court justices stripped away a long-established constitutional right, taking away Americans' ability to make their own health care decisions. Since then, many states have taken action to restrict health care and to ban abortion, including right here in the state of Florida. These new draconian laws and bans have already restricted critical care and denied health care to millions of Americans. Other states have gone even further. Most recently in Alabama, as you recall, judges declared that embryos created through in vitro fertilization should be considered children. Since the ruling, countless families have had their lives thrown into chaos and have been forced to consider whether their medical procedures will be criminalized. Last week, the U.S. Supreme Court heard arguments in a case pushed by Republican lawmakers to ban mifepristone, the same high court that took away Americans' constitutional rights to an abortion will now decide whether to restrict access to abortion medication nationwide, an idea that has been supported by the current Speaker of the House of Representatives and his colleagues. We're going to change that, for sure. But make no mistake, the goal of these extremists is to restrict access to IVF and to enact a nationwide ban on abortion. They'll not stop until they're taken away women's freedom to control their own bodies, their own lives, and their own futures. But across the country, Americans are beginning to stand up to this extremism. In my home state of Michigan, voters stood up to reject extremism and protect reproductive freedom. Last election, Michiganders overwhelmingly enshrined abortion rights in our state's Constitution. Amen to that. Citizens collected over 750,000 signatures to place a statewide referendum on the ballot. And in 2022, Michiganders showed up in overwhelming numbers to protect abortion rights by over 13 percentage points. In that same election, pro-choice candidates were elected up and down the ballot, including for governor, for lieutenant governor, for Secretary of State, for Attorney General, and for the first time in 40 years, Michiganders elected a pro choice majority in the State House of Representatives and the State Senate. Now other states, including the state of Florida, will have the opportunity to have their voices heard at the ballot box. Under the leadership of President Biden, Vice President Harris, and of course, Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries, we're working to restore your rights and reproductive freedoms as well. Democrats have introduced the Access to Family Building Act, which would protect IVF access nationwide. Unfortunately, the majority who control the House of Representatives have blocked us from being able to have a vote on that legislation. We've also introduced the Women's Health Protection Act, legislation to safeguard abortion rights nationwide. Again, the majority has blocked our ability to pass this critical bill. And we have filed legal challenges to protect access to mifepristone. When the American people evaluate their elected officials, they should look at what they do, not just what they say. The former president bragged about overturning Roe, and following suit, Republicans have set their sight on a national abortion ban and severe restrictions on women's right to access reproductive health care that they need. After an outcry from the American people, many Republicans said they support IVF treatment. But despite their public claims of support, 125 of them co-sponsored legislation, the Life at Conception Act, which defines a human being to include all stages of life, including a frozen embryo. They say one thing, they do another. There are forces who want to force women to live in a world where they are denied access to safe reproductive care, even if their lives are at risk. As a father and as a grandfather, I refuse to let my daughter and granddaughter live in a world where they have less rights than their mothers and grandmothers did. And that's why today's hearing is so important. We're using every tool we have available to us to stand up to this kind of extremism and to protect access to reproductive freedoms. This is a question of freedom. That's what this is all about. So Democrats, including and especially Leader Jeffries and President Biden, will not allow us to roll back the clock on a woman's right to make their own decisions about their own body and about their own future. And that's why this meeting and this moment is so important. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Co-Chair Kildee. Before we move to the first panel testimony, I do want to take a moment quickly to acknowledge the remarkable elected officials that have joined us. This is a county that values its reproductive freedom and elects people who support it. And I'm really glad to see them here showing their full-throated support for our efforts. So I want to acknowledge State Representative Hillary Cassell, State Representative Robin Bartleman, hold your applause please, State Representative Marie Woodson, incoming Democratic leader Christine Hunchofsky from the State House of Representatives, Senator Tina Polsky, Senator Lori Berman, Commissioner Plantation City Council Member Louis Reinstein, Mayor Wayne Messam from the City of Miramar, Plantation City Councilwoman Jennifer Andreu, County Commissioner Hazel Rogers, also a former state legislator, and Alan Zeman, a member of the Broward County School Board. So thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate it. And also I want to take the opportunity to thank especially my staff. I just acknowledged her. Thank you. I want to take a moment to recognize especially my staff for the remarkable logistics and the work that went into putting this together today, and the leader's staff and all of our staff, because any elected official will tell you that it is not possible to put on an event like this and a hearing like this without the incredible support and expertise of our staff. So thank you so much to all of them. So now we'll move to the first of our two panels this morning. And Congressman Kildee and I will share the opportunity to introduce you, and then we'll begin with your testimony. Deborah Dorbert is a Floridian wife and mother who tragically had to bear the consequences of Florida's 15-week abortion ban, which, by the way, went into effect while it was being considered through the court docket. During a routine ultrasound checkup the day before Thanksgiving of 2022, Ms. Dorbert learned that a severe complication had developed, which she will describe in her testimony. That complication unfortunately led to the death of her son Milo shortly after birth. But as we will hear, the pain Ms. Dorbert, her husband Lee, and her sons endured could have been minimized had it not been for the laws in the state of Florida. And now I'll turn to my co-chair, Mr. Kildee, to introduce Ms. Timmaraju.
Thank you so much. Minnie Timmaraju is the president and CEO of Reproductive Freedom for All and the first woman of color and immigrant to helm this organization. As a seasoned political strategist and change maker, she has more than 20 years of experience leading efforts to advance reproductive rights, gender justice, and racial justice in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. Ms. Timmaraju served as senior advisor to the director of the Office of Personnel Management in the Biden-Harris administration. There, she advised the agency on leadership on diversity, equality, inclusion, and accessibility policies. She's also served as a senior staffer in Congress and has held key positions at Planned Parenthood Gulf Coast, Planned Parenthood Houston, and Southeast Texas Action Fund and the Planned Parenthood Federation of America. And as national director of the National Council of Asian Pacific Americans, she managed legislative advocacy and communication strategy for a coalition of 34 Pacific American organizations. So thank you so much for being here. I yield back.
Thank you so much. Dr. Joan Waitkevicz is a physician specializing in internal medicine for over 5 decades. Currently, she is a provider at a freestanding reproductive health care facility that is licensed by the state of Florida and accredited by the National Abortion Federation. Dr. Waitkevicz is also an engaged member of the community and advocates for abortion care and a range of other issues on behalf of women and girls in her community in Florida and across the United States. During her career, Dr. Waitkevicz provided care to communities in need here in Florida and other states. For 8 years, she volunteered at the People's Health Center in the Bronx. She saw patients and taught a community health workers course where people learned medical skills and how to recognize common illnesses. Welcome to the Steering and Policy Committee field hearing. Sandra Elidor is an author, mentor, small business owner, and advocate. Ms. Elidor battled with endometriosis and reproductive issues herself. She was able to turn her pain into her life's purpose by learning to embrace her flaws and helping others embrace their pain. She is now an infertility advocate and the founder of a nonprofit called Filling Empty Wombs, which focuses on infertility and pregnancy loss while educating women about health issues that can lead to infertility. Filling Empty Wombs offers support, advocacy, financial assistance, and education for couples with infertility or pregnancy loss. Ms. Elidor is also a business owner and runs Parenting Plug, which is a platform that provides educational tips and coaching to parents. And thank you very much for joining us. Finally, Dr. Ian Bishop graduated from the University of Miami Miller School of Medicine, where he also completed a Master's of Public Health in Maternal Child Health after serving as a Fulbright Hays Scholar with the U.S. Department of State and focused on developing women's health services in East Africa. Dr. Bishop holds dual board certification in both obstetrics and gynecology and complex family planning. His clinical practice, located within an academic medical center in South Florida, focuses on contraception for women with medical comorbidities, the management of pregnancy loss, and abortion care. Dr. Bishop also serves a role where he has firsthand experience working with and training our newest doctors and medical professionals. Since the Dobbs decision, he has spent a significant amount of time educating medical students, residents, and fellows on evidence-based options, counseling, comprehensive family planning, and abortion care. And with that, I want to thank all of you for being here and for talking to us about your experiences as it relates to reproductive freedom in the state of Florida and in our nation. Before I call on the first witness, which will be Ms. Dorbert, we want to draw your attention to a brief video.
My water broke one night when I was walking outside of a restaurant, and I just felt that something was just wrong. So then we had an ultrasound. They sent me back for the ultrasound, and my daughter was still moving around and her heart was still beating. But they told me that at that point, because I had lost all my fluid, there's nothing that I can do. So I looked at him, I said, okay, so what are you going to do? What are we supposed to do? Are we terminating? He said, we can't do anything. I said, excuse me? And as I sat there and I looked at him and he looked at me and he said, I'm so sorry.
That's it.
That's it. And I said, are you serious? That is it? You have nothing else to say to me? You're not going to help me? And then the nurse comes and she's so angry. And she just says, damn it. And I said, okay, I'm going to get out of here. because you can't help me anymore. There's nothing else that you can do for me. And he said, I'm so sorry. It was at a hair salon, and I ended up going there because I said if I was going to die, my mother wouldn't have to do my hair. I would make sure that my hair was done for my mother. That was so sad and so traumatic. And I said goodbye to my mom that morning because I wasn't sure if I was going to have my daughter on the way, and I would, because the way how when I went back home and I researched PPROM, I was like, oh my, I'm going to die. I might get sepsis. I don't know how fast this is going to happen. So when I'm in the salon, and then something just told me, go in the bathroom. And I went in the bathroom and I sat down, and I just felt something just say, push. And I heard her hit the water. And at that point, I had to call my husband because he was outside, and I called him and I said, babe, I need you to come inside. And he came in and he said to me, he's like, okay, what's wrong? And I said, I think she's here, but I can't look. And he said, I won't let you look. I won't let you look. And he looked and he said, okay, I see her, but you have blood.
You were hemorrhaging to death.
I started hemorrhaging, and I didn't realize it because there's so much adrenaline going through me, and I didn't know what else to do. And he just got on the phone and he called 911, and they rushed in and they grabbed me. They literally had to just grab so much cloth to hold up my blood. And they said, if you can just tense your body up to hold the blood, because if you release your body, you will continue to lose blood. And I said, well, can you take me to Coral Springs? They said, you're not going to make it to Coral Springs. I said, okay. And I blacked out at that point.
You've got medical doctors telling you, sorry, there's nothing can do. But did they share with you, Anya and Sinead, did they say it's because we're scared, we don't really know what to do with these abortion laws? That's what they said?
Yes, that's exactly what they said.
It's just me and my husband here. We moved to USA 11 years ago, to live here and to have a better life here. And then they help us to find a place, and then I went to Washington, D.C.
And you drove to?
No, I flew.
You flew. And
then,
on that flight, how?
It's a nightmare. Everybody see my belly and ask me about the baby. And I couldn't tell nothing, just crying because I'm afraid of my life. But I'm so I thought about suicide because I never thought about that. My husband was crying and we didn't know what to do.
That video is some of the stories of the impact on Florida women since the 15-week abortion ban took effect in our state. And it put fear in the hearts of not just women and their family members, but into our healthcare providers who face criminal prosecution if they are found to be in violation of that law. So with that, we'll move to Deborah Dorbert. You're recognized for your opening statement.
Okay. I took a at-home pregnancy test and it came back positive. I was excited and couldn't wait to tell my husband Lee I was pregnant. Afterwards, I scheduled an appointment with my OB to confirm I was in fact pregnant. She confirmed that I was pregnant, and from there I had routine monthly checkups. Lee and I were excited to be growing our family and give our son a sibling. We told our son Caden that I was going to have a baby and he was going to be a big brother. He was not happy at first and didn't want a sibling. Everything was going smoothly with my pregnancy. besides experiencing the normal symptoms of morning sickness and being tired. And the day before Thanksgiving, at 23 weeks, I scheduled to have an ultrasound anatomy scan. Caden went with me that day. At the appointment, Caden was excited seeing the baby on the screen and calling out the body parts. Everything quickly changed after the tech asked me some questions, then left the room to get the OB. After my OB looked at the ultrasound, she had this look on her face that something was terribly wrong. She told me I had the right to know what she was seeing. She proceeded to tell me that the baby's kidneys didn't develop. I asked her if my baby was going to live, and she said not without a kidney transplant. Caden started to cry as he watched his mommy crying after finding out the news. He didn't know what was going on, but he said to me, "It's going to be okay, Mommy." My OB set up an appointment with MFM to confirm what she saw. We had left that appointment and met Lee at the park to tell him what I just found out. A week went by, and we finally had our appointment with MFM. During that appointment, he did a level 2 ultrasound and confirmed the baby had no kidneys. He diagnosed the baby with a life-threatening condition called Potter syndrome. He explained everything about the diagnosis and how the baby wouldn't live long after birth, maybe a few minutes, 2 hours. There, we discussed our option on how we wanted to proceed with the pregnancy. It was the toughest decision we had to make as parents, but we decided to get preterm induced. We thought this was the best option for our family because pregnancy itself isn't easy on a mother, and additional concerns would be more painful. MFM agreed with our decision, but he had a talk with the administration first, as the new abortion laws could affect me getting induced. About a month went by, and we finally got word from him that I could not get preterm induced due to the laws. I had no choice but to carry the baby to full term. We were angry and upset with our choices alongside our doctors who were taken from us. I continued to have regular checkups with my OB so that she could monitor my health and to see if the baby had a heartbeat, because if the baby became stillborn, she would need to induce me for my health. The next few months were the toughest times of my life, as I continued to grow and experience horrible pain from the baby pushing up on different body parts. I struggled with my mental health, experienced depression, and anxiety. Caden continued to see my belly grow and started getting excited about his sibling. We hadn't told him the baby was diagnosed with Potter syndrome yet, because how do you tell a 4-year-old child that his sibling's gonna die? And finally, at 37 weeks, I was able to get induced and had the baby. And the day before we went to the hospital, we told Caden that the baby's body stopped working and died, and that the baby was going to be an angel. Caden didn't understand, and he started to cry, saying he didn't want to be an angel and wanted to stay here with us. And on March 3rd, I got induced and had a baby boy. I held him in my arms, and he passed away 94 minutes later.
Thank you, Deborah. I know that's an incredibly difficult story to share, and that you've shared it before, and that repeating it and reliving it must be so incredibly hard. And I want to acknowledge your husband, Lee, who is here in the audience today as well. I know none of us can go through these really difficult personal healthcare experiences without our support network and system and family members around us. So thank you so much. Ms. Timmaraju, thank you so much for joining us, and you're recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you so much. Good morning, Leader Jeffries, co-chairs Wasserman Schultz and Kildee, and the esteemed members at this hearing, and to my fellow witnesses. My name is Minnie Timmaraju, President and CEO of Reproductive Freedom for All, formerly known as NARAL Pro-Choice America. Our organization is dedicated to protecting and advancing reproductive freedom alongside our 4 million members nationwide, including access to abortion at the federal and state levels through education, organizing, and public policy. Every day, millions of people across our country are suffering the dangerous ramifications of anti-abortion extremist abortion bans. 21 states and counting have already eliminated or restricted access because of abortion bans, forcing some people to travel hundreds of miles to other states to access abortion and leading many blocked from care to live through horrific situations like you just heard. The patchwork of legal abortion in our country means that your freedom to build the family and life that you want is determined by where you live, how much money you have, and your ability to travel. And nowhere in the nation is a better demonstration of this patchwork and what we can do to fight back than right here in Florida. As we've already discussed and heard, the state Supreme Court just ruled in favor of a 15-week abortion ban, paving the way for a 6-week ban to take effect on May 1st, which, as we all know, is before most people even know that they're pregnant. But at the same time, voters are going to have the chance to reject those bans this November. And already nearly 1 million of them have shown their support for doing so by helping to get an abortion rights amendment on the ballot. So while we face a crisis, the good news is that the American people will not tolerate these attacks on their reproductive freedom and have made that clear time and time again. Since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, voters have gone to the polls 7 times to directly weigh in on abortion. And all 7 times, they've cast their ballots to protect and expand reproductive freedom. This November, they will have the chance to do it again. However, our work to protect our fundamental rights does not stop there. 8 in 10 Americans, including 2/3 of Republicans, agree that decisions about abortion should be made by the pregnant person and their doctor, not the government, according to new Axios Ipsos polling. And 2/3 of Americans support a nationwide law guaranteeing access to legal abortion, according to new polling from Fox News. Yeah, that's right. Even Fox News understands that Americans support abortion. You, members of Congress, have overwhelming support and, I'll say, a moral obligation from the American people across party affiliations to act. And while you've done so time and time again, all of our elected leaders, from the state and local level to the federal level, must continue to prioritize reproductive freedom. What all of these attacks on reproductive freedom that we're talking about today underscore is that we absolutely must pass a federal right to abortion. And you've done it twice, I believe, in the House. Thank you, Leader. And we can't stop there. We must also ensure and expand access to abortion care. That's why we must take steps to eliminate the Hyde Amendment and expand healthcare access, including reproductive health care for immigrants and their families, all while continuing to fight back against Republican attacks on abortion rights, as well as IVF and contraception, and our democratic institutions, specifically voting rights and the courts, as these freedoms are deeply intertwined. And our ability to have unfettered access to the polls is really impacting our ability to have reproductive freedom and the courts. We are so grateful to Leader Jeffries and House Democrats for your leadership, ensuring that all of us have the freedom to make our own decisions about our lives, bodies, and futures. And I must note, we're also very grateful to the Biden-Harris administration for using the whole of government approach to protect our rights and freedoms. I'm looking forward to hearing more from Secretary Becerra. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ms. Timmaraju. We've also been joined by Coral Springs City Commissioner Nancy Mateo-Bowen and the Miramar Vice Mayor Alexandra Davis. Dr. Waitkevicz, you are now recognized for 3 minutes.
Good morning, co-chairs Wasserman Schultz, and the esteemed members of this hearing, all of our Start again. Hi. Good morning, co-chairs Wasserman Schultz, Leanne Kildee, and esteemed members of this hearing and all of our friends in the room. I'm Dr. Joan Waitkevicz, she, her. I'm board certified in internal medicine and one of many non-gynecologists throughout the United States that provides medication abortion care. I'm here to testify about how it has felt to be working under Florida's 15-week abortion ban, and what yesterday's shocking news about the 6-week ban to be imposed May 1st will mean for us and for our patients. Also, I'd like to say a word about the consequences of abortion bans from the view of a primary care practitioner, because that is what I used to do. The 15-week ban took effect 2 years ago. Our ultrasound technicians, our counselors, our interpreters, our nurses became the ones who bear the burden of turning away a patient. My coworkers are a racially and ethnically diverse group, young enough to get pregnant themselves. They have to face the patient's anger and grief with kindness and calm, even though inside they may feel the same. When we can't help someone, we refer them to our local abortion access fund and bless them. They arrange for a volunteer pilot to fly them to a licensed clinic up north. But so many can't leave their families or their jobs to go up north, and it's the people who didn't have good health care to begin with. They're caregivers to disabled children or elders. They're disproportionately people of color, people who are poor, who live in the country rather than the city, people whose family is not supportive or who have no family nearby. I want to talk about the real world now. In the real world, Florida's 6-week ban is a total abortion ban. To obtain abortion care before 6 weeks, you have to be laser focused on your cycle. Your cycle has to be laser regular. You have to be well connected, and you have to be lucky. We will do our best to help or refer our patients, but it will be really hard for the fund and the volunteers to handle the strain. In the real world, exceptions to a ban do not work. When lawmakers put exceptions on a total abortion ban, they are sending us a message. Some people seeking abortion are worthy and some are not. We who are allies should not fall into this line of thinking. Every person's reason is the right reason. Florida, as of May 1st, allows exceptions for rape or incest if reported to the police and up to 15 weeks. A fatal fetal abnormality if up to 24 weeks. A medical condition that might cause death. A medical commission, and this part is really repugnant to an internist. Think of it from the point of view of your medical doctor. A medical condition that might cause, quote, a serious risk of substantial and irreversible physical impairment of a major bodily function of the pregnant woman other than a psychological condition. That is terrible. There is no exception for suicidality. Hello? Adolescent suicide? Last month, there was a letter to the Journal of the American Medical Association titled Rape-Related Pregnancies in the 14 States with Total Abortion Bans. There were thousands, but the authors estimated over 5,500 pregnancies resulting from rape have occurred since Dobbs in state with a rape exception to the ban, because 79% of rapes are not reported to the police. Back in November of 22, the Journal of the American Medical Association had an issue devoted to the unintended consequences of abortion bans on the practice of medicine in general. They pointed out that the best treatments for several cancers, for lupus, epilepsy, bipolar disorder, migraine, and rheumatoid arthritis may cause fetal abnormalities. The specialists prescribing these treatments must prescribe birth control as well. But birth control fails. And if birth control fails while someone is on these medications, it is usual to offer early abortion. And some of us who've been living in Florida for a while may remember that there was a well-loved newscaster who was diagnosed with breast cancer in early pregnancy, who chose not to take chemo so that she would not need to have abortion, and so she could have her child. And she died. Finally, in the real world, Abortion bans keep obstetricians from giving their best care. I'm going to stop right here and defer the rest of that discussion to Dr. Bishop. But thank you for your concern, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Waitkevicz. Ms. Elidor, you're now recognized for 3 minutes.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sandra Elidor, and I'm here representing the infertility community. As someone that had issues, not knowing they had issues growing up as a teenager, with countless of doctor's appointments, not realizing that later on in my 29th, by the time I turned 29, ready to have children, that I had something called endometriosis. And endometriosis, there's 1 out of 8 of us that carries that. And it is a debilitating pain that many of us have to go through. And endometriosis is one of the leading causes of infertility, along with PCOS and fibroids, and many others. I am here not only representing me, but the infertility community, the pregnancy loss community, the countless of stories that I get to hear in my nonprofit organization called Filling Empty Wounds, that many people believe that abortion doesn't apply to us. But unfortunately, it does. Our community, we want children. We want to have them. We are doing everything we need to do in order to get them, mentally, physically, an amount of debt in order to get pregnant. So many people assume it doesn't apply to us. But unfortunately, when the passing of Alabama occurred, many of us were scared. What would that look like for us? Would we be able to carry the child that we spend so much money on in order to get pregnant? Is that possible? Along with others I spoke to here in South Florida, many of them decide to stop infertility treatment because of fear. Something they've been wanting for years, now they suddenly have to put a pause, waiting on voters to find out what's going to happen for us. Although people are assuming that people in the abortion community just don't want to have children, we want to have children, and it's being stopped for us. We want it, and we're being told, no, there's a possibility you cannot. My community, we're frightened. And if you know anyone that went through infertility, it is a scary experience for many of us. And it's not because someone in the past had an abortion, now they feel like now they're being persecuted. Many of us, it's not just that, it's because of other health conditions that we did not ask for, that just so happened that this is our situation. Many of us is cancer. Many of us, it is, in my case, endometriosis. And now we're in the situation that this is our only hope to have children. And now we have to leave it to the government to determine our rights. Can or should we be able to bear children the way we want to? And in many cases, after IVF, it doesn't guarantee that you're actually going to have that child, because many of us also end up going through pregnancy loss while trying to bear children. And we also have to make that hard decision. Is this child viable? Are we going to make it to the end? Will we ever get to hold our baby? Will we see the first day of school? These are ideas that goes through our head while trying to pay for IVF, while the person next to us may not understand. But now we have another burden that we have to carry. Will the government make that decision for us? And honestly, it should not be the government's decision to make. We are already going through the struggle. We don't need another barrier in order to hold our baby. We don't need another hiccup because someone else decide to take something so private and make it a public forum for them. That's not fair. We hold enough already. And as someone that went through infertility, that I end up having my miracle baby. But we tried again. And unfortunately, that ended up in a loss. We were so traumatic from 7 years of trying after we had our child. It took us 7 years mentally to try another one because I had pregnancy complications. I was in the hospital, bed rest, and ended up having a 29-week-old baby. After that, because of the trauma we had, we said, after we had our pregnancy loss, we can't do this again. Only because the decision was now we would have a higher chance of having another miscarriage. And mentally, we just couldn't go through that again. But many of us try 7, 10 times to get pregnant. And unfortunately, it's not successful. So please, help us in the fight. We don't want to have somebody else to make that decision for us. We already have enough decisions that we have to make. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Elidor. Thank you for sharing your personal experience. Dr. Bishop, you're recognized for 3 minutes. Thank you so much.
Good morning to the committee. Today I'm speaking from here, from my heart, on my own behalf. I'm not speaking on behalf of the institutions where I work or my trusted and valued colleagues. In medicine, we generally consider the exercise of conscience synonymous with refusing to partake in a particular medical service. This is especially true in abortion care. This depiction, however, neglects the fact that the provision of life-saving abortion is also conscience-based. Though I work within Florida law, I have much to lose: marginalization, harassment, stigma, the threat of violence, physical harm. But it is that exact conscience, my conscience, that has motivated me to speak today. My upbringing, my education, my profession, my family, my religion, all compel me to be a compassionate OBGYN. And that includes providing abortion care. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart for allowing this panel to share our stories, experiences, and recommendations as we seek to restore reproductive choice and evidence-based practice in Florida. My name is Dr. Ian Joseph Bishop. I am a double board certified obstetrician and gynecologist and complex family planning. My clinical focus is contraception and abortion care, both in the first and second trimesters. I also provide prenatal care, perform deliveries, and support patients through pregnancy loss. To me, they are all intertwined components of reproductive health and improving the health of our community. I'm a proud abortion provider working at a large tertiary care center that cares for the sickest of the sick, the uninsured and underinsured, and the marginalized. In truth, taking care of these patients is my dream job. I'm compelled by my conscience to provide abortion, and I have the training and skills to do so compassionately and well. But not being able to help a person in front of me as I hold their hand is devastating. We're no longer basing our medical judgment on the clinical needs of our patients. We're basing it on what we understand the legal situation to be. These laws are created to instill chaos and confusion among physicians, as well as fear and shame among patients, not improve the health of our communities. Physicians feel squeezed between the law and their medical responsibility to care for patients. And with so much confusion from vaguely worded bans and the risk of a felony charge, they're erring on the side of inaction. And inaction has consequences. Prior to the ban, providers made decisions with their patients to avoid harm and medical complications that can arise in pregnancy, supporting women as they made difficult decisions in their best interest, in the best interest of their own health and social conditions. Now we wait for complications to arise prior to providing evidence-based preventative health care. The current Florida statutes governing abortion care state that an abortion is permitted after 15 weeks to avert a serious risk of substantial and irreversible physical impairment of a major bodily function other than a psychological condition. As a physician, I ask, what does that mean in a medical context? Who defines substantial? Doesn't every pregnancy pose a risk? Are we no longer considering mental health a component of well-being? It is frightening and confusing for physicians and the whole team that care for patients. What is okay? What is not okay? How sick must someone become before we can provide them with evidence-based care? How imminent must death be? The ruling yesterday, making Florida now one of the most restrictive abortion states in the country, will also have profound implications for medical education. It will fundamentally reshape the quality of care provided by future physicians and no doubt worsen shortages of OBGYNs in the state. And I'm not just referring to abortion providers. Take a look at Idaho. In a study published this year over a 15-month period, 22% of OBGYNs left the state. 55% of high-risk obstetricians have also left. 2 hospital OBGYN programs have closed in that period, and another is set to close this month. For medical students, residents, and fellows, abortion training and exposure in restrictive states is becoming non-existent, creating a generation of doctors who will be ill-equipped to meet their patients' need. The surgical procedure I am trained to perform in the 2nd trimester for an abortion is also the exact procedure that is used for pregnancy loss. Abortion care discourse is particularly important for promoting professionalism and mitigating bias. Students must learn to reflect on the relationship between personal beliefs and obligations as a medical professional, particularly when they diverge. It improves the metrics of respect for patient privacy and autonomy, commitment to ethical principles, professionalism, and humanism. In a study from 2023, over half of surveyed medical students state that they are unlikely to apply to a residency program located in a state with abortion restrictions. This sample represented students applying to many specialties, not just OBGYN. Residents who before the Dobbs decision intended to practice in abortion restrictive states were 8 times more likely to change their practice plans than those who plan to practice in protected states before the Dobbs decision. It is crucial for the committee to understand the far-reaching consequences of abortion bans. We need federal protections now, or our patients will continue to suffer, our maternal outcomes will continue to worsen, and our medical education will have large voids. We ask for help. We need laws that allow us to care for our patients as healthcare providers, not shackle us. We should be increasing access to evidence-based, compassionate, and timely abortion care. My patients need your help. Thank you for having me here today and for holding this important hearing.
Thank you, Dr. Bishop. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Bishop, and thank you to each of the panelists for your really incredibly impactful testimony. I'm going to yield myself 5 minutes for my questions, and then I will turn it over to my co-chair, Dan Kildee, and as I step away for a moment. Ms. Dorbert, first of all, I want to thank you so much for your courage, your bravery, your commitment to share what I am certain is the most difficult experience of yours and your husband and family's life, really with the world. And that this is not the first time that you have taken the opportunity to do that. My question for you is, and I know it's difficult, but can you talk about the challenges and difficulties that you encountered when told by your physician that an abortion was not possible to perform? What were the obstacles that they shared with you that they were facing as far as why there wasn't a way to induce and end your pregnancy in spite of the fact that your son was essentially terminal?
So after my doctors told me I could not get induced, they said it was because the walls in their hands were tied. And so from there, they just kind of said, we need to closely monitor you.
If you mind if I can just interrupt you for a second. When they said, did they explain to you why they couldn't, as a result of the law, induce you?
They said when I had a personal number to MFM's coordinator, and she had texted me and told me I could not get induced due to the laws, even though the baby had a life-threatening condition. Until my life was on the line, I couldn't get induced. And so that is what they told me.
And was it made clear, obviously, if you're carrying a baby that is terminal, there is certainly jeopardy to your own life. I assume you asked questions, did they share with you any details about what it even meant, how they would determine whether your life was on the line?
If I developed preeclampsia or the baby went stillborn, and they just gave me a list of symptoms to watch for and to call immediately because they would need to jump in to save my life. So preeclampsia is one. The baby, if he stopped moving, those were the two biggest things they had me look for. And so it was constant going back into their offices every couple of weeks to see if they could hear the baby, check, just do different health checks for me to make sure, I'm okay.
And what were some of the difficulties that you had carrying a fetus that you knew was not going to survive once you were induced?
So there was no amniotic fluid, so there was no cushion for the baby. So he pushed up on my diaphragm, my SI. My belly was as tight as you can imagine. Like, it was so tight because I couldn't grow more. So he pushed up on every body part you could feel.
So on top of not knowing that the baby did not have kidneys, you also had no amniotic fluid?
Yeah, there was no amniotic fluid because amniotic fluid is developed through the baby's urine, but the baby
Right.
wasn't urinating because of no kidneys. So there was no amniotic fluid. So
And Florida
there was-
law forced you to carry the baby until 37 weeks with no amniotic fluid and a certainty that he would not survive.
Yes.
What was the impact on in the final seconds that I have, what was the impact on your family, on your husband, on your son?
We've all struggled with our mental health. Even my 4-year-old has had to see a therapist to understand, why his brother died. And so we've just all really struggled with our mental health and obviously my physical health. It's taken a long time for me to recover, and I'm still not recovered from it.
I can't think of a more clear example of the horrific impact that an extreme 15-week abortion ban in our state could possibly have, and that this decision wasn't left because of the law in Florida to you and your doctor and your family. I'm so sorry, and just know that we're going to continue to fight on your behalf to get to November and make sure that we can end this nightmare. Thank you so much. I'll yield now to my colleague and co-chair, Mr. Kildee. I'll be back in a moment.
Thank you. I yield myself 5 minutes for questions, but I first want to say I've been in Congress. This is my 12th year in Congress. I've sat through hundreds and hundreds of hearings. I don't think I've ever been so moved or compelled by the testimony that I've heard today. And I just want to assure you that for those of us on this dais, we leave even more firmly committed than ever before to try to do what we can to protect your rights to make your own decisions about your own futures, about your own health care, about your own bodies. So thank you so much for that. Ms. Timmaraju, I wonder if you might comment a bit further. These anti-abortion extremists that we're all dealing with have worked to erode the rights of women to make their own decisions about their bodies and their future, but I think specifically there are particular challenges, and I wonder if you might speak to the connection between this most recent Alabama Supreme Court ruling on IVF and other post-Dobbs decisions to limit access to reproductive health care, and what you think the next phase of this Republican-led extreme anti-abortion agenda might actually look like.
Thanks for the question, and I also agree. I listen to these stories professionally, like for my job, every day, and the testimony today was incredibly devastating. As the parent of two 5-year-olds, the idea of my 4-year-old having to listen to any of that, it's disgusting. And I think all the testimony here today really underscores the urgency of action. But to your question, look, it's very clear that once Roe fell, it opened up just a landscape of devastation across the country, right? You've heard from the providers on this panel, and I was really struck by the point about exceptions, because we make this point all the time, that all of this is designed to be chaotic. It was not designed to be like an effective strategy. They frankly did not know what they were doing, and their goal was very simple. It was to exert power and control. I want to make it really clear that it's not about science, it's not about viability, it's not about exceptions, it's not about any kind of, fake medical junk science mumbo jumbo from the other side. It's about power and control and controlling people's bodies. And this is important because as in your roles, it's super easy to get caught up in these debates about weeks and months and what about this, exception. And I really discourage you from doing that, because when you think about the root cause analysis of these bans, it will clarify it. So to your question about what's next, we saw from Dobbs, you go from overturning Roe to Alabama Supreme Court. And what's the through line? What's the thread there? It's extremist views from many of your colleagues. The majority of Republicans in the House signed on to life begins at conception legislation. If you believe, logically or illogically, if your theology compels you to believe that concept, it does not end with IVF, right? It ends with birth control, the morning after pill. There's a reason those of us in the movement were fighting for decades to get Plan B in pharmacies. Maybe under the radar for most Americans, but not for those of us in the provider and advocacy communities, right? It's because they want pregnancy and they believe it is their sacred and moral duty to pursue it at all costs, right? They do not want us to stop pregnancy. So I could go down the rabbit hole of all the theology and the Project 2025 stuff you've been following in the news, but what's important to note is the Speaker of the House supports that ideology, believes it, and is a leader nationally and promoting it. So there is not a more important election and moment for you all to be raising the alarm with your colleagues. I do believe there are Republicans in this country, particularly the people, the voters, who are shocked and alarmed and do not agree with this direction, but their voices are not being heard and they need courage to come join the coalition.
Thank you for that. I wonder if I just might turn to our two physicians to comment. Just listening to your testimony and then listening to the stories that we've heard, it's obvious that your training, your oath, calls upon you to do what you can to serve the healthcare interests of the patients that you care for. Yet, under the laws that we are now seeing enacted, you quite literally, as a physician, could be imprisoned for following your oath and your training to provide the proper care that you believe is in the best interest of the patients that you serve, the people you know. And I wonder if you just might comment on the chilling effect that that threat has on the daily practices of physicians that are trying to meet the needs of the people that they are charged with serving. In either order. Go ahead. Dr. Waitkevicz, go ahead.
Is it on?
Yes.
Back when I was in New York and abortion was legal, I had a patient who ended up with a medical emergency, acute pancreatitis, and she didn't make it to my hospital, and she ended up in a Catholic hospital. And she was pregnant at the time, and she became strongly convinced that the severity of her pancreatitis, which is sometimes a near fatal condition, would affect the pregnancy and that she should not continue with her pregnancy. Well, the hospital that she was in wouldn't allow it, and she had to get herself out of that hospital, still sick, and go to a hospital where they would honor all of her healthcare needs. That's my personal experience. One of my colleagues pointed out that he is a little bit scared to transfer in Dallas-Fort Worth Airport anymore when flying from Florida to Points West. Because when someone comes from out of state to have an abortion, they go home with their medical records in hand. And she or her referring doctor are not going to turn him in, but if an unfriendly person got a hold of that piece of paper, they could issue a warrant for his arrest. That's about the extent of my experience with that.
Thank you. We are tight on time. Dr. Bishop, if you have a brief comment you'd like to make, then I'd like to recognize Representative Kelly.
It's difficult for me to be concise, but I'll try.
Yeah.
I think we all go into medicine for different reasons, but one thing that connects all physicians and healthcare providers is our dedication and upholding of medical ethics, whether it's patient autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, justice. These components, they draw us in, and we hold them very dear to us. And what happens when abortion laws go into effect? Patient autonomy, out the door.
Right.
It's nothing anymore. Justice, out the door. It's not there anymore. Doing no harm. No, we actually know that we are doing harm to our patients by banning and restricting abortion. And it's challenging, and I think from the community, our big ask is leave this to healthcare providers and patients and who they trust, whether it's family members or religious resources. Let the patients decide with their trusted allies what decision is best for them.
Thank you so very much. With that, I now recognize Representative Kelly for 5 minutes for questions.
Good morning. Excuse me, it's an honor for me to be here. I have been at the forefront of the battle to raise awareness about the maternal health crisis, shining a light on the alarming rise in maternal mortality rates, especially among Black women nationwide. It's clear that assaults on abortion and reproductive rights directly affect maternal health outcomes, as we observe higher rates of maternal mortality and infant deaths in states with abortion restrictions, particularly impacting communities of color and rural residents. Dr. Bishop, can you explain how these abortion bans and other restrictions on reproductive health care impact maternal mortality and morbidity?
Absolutely, and I think you need to go no further than looking at other states that have enacted abortion restrictions and bans and what's happening in those states with maternal health, maternal morbidity and mortality. I think, unfortunately, many of the states that have come out as being the most restrictive environments at baseline already have the most devastating and surprising rates of maternal mortality and morbidity. They invest the least in the health of women, the health of mothers, the health of children. And I think Florida, we will see much larger, stark disparities moving forward if this ban holds. If there's one thing we know about abortion care is that it is safe when performed in the right environment. We know that it is safer than carrying a pregnancy to term. Accessing an early in pregnancy is one of the most important things to ensure that it is safe. And I think we'll see some devastating consequences down the line.
Yeah, I was going to say, according to the CDC, Florida has a maternal rate of 26%, which is higher than the national average. And how have abortion restrictions in Florida affected the health and well-being of your patients? And do you worry about the long-term effects on the state's already high maternal mortality rate?
I absolutely do. We already have an OBGYN shortage. I mentioned it in my opening remarks. I'm worried about where our trainees are going to end up. Most trainees do not want to end up in a restricted state. I've brought today one of my residents and one of my medical students here because I want them to see this. I want them to experience this. I don't want them to take things for granted as they provide care moving forward. And in a sense, I want to fire them up a little bit.
Thank you. Black, Indigenous, and other communities of color have long experienced systemic disparities in accessing health care and reproductive rights. These disparities, influenced by factors like limited health care access and economic inequality, have led to significant challenges and numerous health disparities among marginalized communities. Miss, I don't want to screw your name up, but Timmaraju? All right. These inequities often extend into the criminalization of reproductive health care. For instance, consider the case of Brittany Watts, a Black woman from Ohio who faced criminal charges after experiencing a miscarriage at home in September after significant delays in medical attention. What do you believe are the potential legal ramifications of abortion bans, particularly on communities of color, even rural communities?
You know, I think, well, the doctor covered it pretty well, Dr. Bishop, but I'll add, since you referenced Brittany Watts, that's the case where miscarriage was criminalized. Look, this is really important to understand, and this is why I brought up Hyde and accessing and expanding care to like immigrant communities as well. Even when Roe was the law of the land, we had criminalization, particularly of people of color in rural communities in tough places. My home state is Texas. I started my career in reproductive rights and advocacy in Texas, and we already had a grave maternal mortality situation, particularly in rural parts of the state where disproportionately brown, not even immigrant, but Latina populations live, right? Currently, one out of every 10 American women lives in Texas, where they have a total abortion ban. So we're already seeing the overall death rates for women of reproductive age are higher among women of color. The pregnancy rates are higher among women of color. The domestic violence and sexual assault correlation is higher for women of color. And the folks who are already marginalized from access to care are more disenfranchised when you have abortion bans. But without access to funding and resources, even passing a federal law won't be enough, because these folks won't be able to access that care, and that was the case when Roe was the law of the land too. Your colleague who couldn't join us today, Congresswoman Lee, is a champion of the EACH Act, and I encourage everyone to sign on if they haven't already.
I have many more questions, but I'm getting the pull. But I just want to thank Ms. Elidor and Ms. Dorbert for sharing your stories. I'm sure it's not easy, so thank you so very much. I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Kelly. Now, for 5 minutes for questioning, Representative Castor.
Thank you, Chair Kildee, and thank you for the opportunity to be here, and thank you to our witnesses. And Ms. Dorbert, you are especially courageous in telling your story. It's a very, very poignant, important moment for all of us. All Americans have been reeling since Republicans engineered a takeover of the U.S. Supreme Court and the stripping of our rights under Roe versus Wade, rights that we enjoyed for decades. Now Florida has taken up the mantle with this extreme, cruel abortion ban. A 6-week ban is in essence a total ban because women do not know that they're pregnant at 6 weeks. I heard you loud and clear talk about the harsh consequences not just to young women, but for all women and families, because of what this will lead to, an erosion of high-quality reproductive care in Florida and in other states that are being subjected to these cruel abortion bans. Dr. Bishop, let's take Florida. We already have a doctor shortage in Florida. I've heard from medical students and providers that it's quite likely that students will not come and train in Florida, that they will seek out states where they can get the full range of training in family planning and reproductive care. What is your view?
Absolutely. I work with medical students every day. I work with residents every day.
Could you pull the microphone a little closer?
I said absolutely. I work with medical students every day. I work with residents every day. I work with fellows every day. I help mentor those going into medicine. I talk to them about what their aspirations are, what kind of practice they want to start, what profession they want to go in, what specialty they want to do, and we talk about where to go. And when I talk about comprehensive OBGYN training, it's limited to train in a state where I'm not going to become the most compassionate, well-handed physician that can care for someone in a time of need, in a time of emergency. And so there is a struggle. There are lots of concerns among learners about staying in red states for their graduate education.
So what does that mean for the woman who is, is going into the second trimester and wants that child, that family has prayed over, they want that child, and yet they suffer some medical emergency? What does it mean if we don't have a doctor who is fully trained on the full range of reproductive care?
It means options will be limited, if not non-existent, for many women. We know that this will affect minority communities more. We won't know that this will affect low-income communities more. But what we're looking at is abortion deserts. We're looking at abortion deserts where people, if they have the means necessary to travel, will have to go elsewhere for their care.
Do you think women will die?
Absolutely.
And Representative Kelly, I appreciate your leadership so much on the maternal mortality crisis, and thank you for highlighting the unfortunate statistic that we're doing worse in the state of Florida than most other states. Doctor, what does it mean for our maternal mortality crisis in Florida? With these abortion bans and not having fully trained doctors, will that make it even worse?
I think it will make it even more stark. Over the years, part of the care that I've done has been abroad in international medicine, and when you look at global maternal mortality, one of the largest contributors to that is unsafe abortion. If you want to make an impact on global maternal mortality and morbidity, the biggest impact you could possibly make is addressing questions of unsafe abortion in an international setting. And I think, unfortunately, sooner rather than later, we're going to start seeing some of these disparities in our state and across this country.
We're not going to let that happen. We're going to fight back. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman Castro. The gentlelady yields back, and Congressman Soto, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Wasserman Schultz. Yesterday, the Florida Supreme Court slammed the door shut on reproductive freedom for millions of Florida women. But then they handed the keys over to the voters to decide in November 5th to be exact. So Floridians will get to vote on whether women and families get to make this deeply personal decision of reproductive freedom, or whether right-wing state legislators will get to make it. I want to talk briefly about the Supreme Court decision on the right to abortion. It was always understood for decades that the right to privacy in Florida included the right to an abortion. Even the plain language, every natural person has the right to be let alone and free from government intrusion into the person's private life except as otherwise provided herein. It was a truly radical decision to reverse decades of precedent when it's so clear that the amendment would apply to a woman's right to choose. And it was also actively contemplated and debated when that amendment got into the Constitution. But now we have real consequences. As of May 1st, a 6-week ban. And when you look at access, the closest state, North Carolina, 12 weeks, over 500 miles away. Virginia, fully legal, 735 miles away. So Florida women are going to be put in an untenable position. I want to focus my questions primarily on mifepristone, since this is right before the Supreme Court now, and over half of abortions nationwide are done through medical abortions. And the 6-week ban, we know, applies to this drug as well as the cocktail of drugs that people use. Dr. Bishop, how is the 6-week ban and the 6-week ban applying to mifepristone affecting your patients here in Florida? Like, what do you expect to happen next?
I unfortunately foresee access being almost non-existent with a 6-week ban. You know, one of the things with medication abortions, and we're seeing kind of changes in
Dr.
who is
Bishop, pull the
utilizing.
mic a little closer. Thank you.
You know, over 50% of early abortions in the United States are medication abortions. One is many patients prefer this method. They prefer to use a private method to go through the process in the comfort and safety of their home around those that they trust and care for. With a 6-week ban, I can't remember the last time I saw someone in my clinic who came before 6 weeks. I honestly can't. And if the ban is 6 weeks, even if medication abortion is available, at the end of the day, it's not going to actually be available with that ban.
And I worry that Florida women will be seeking this to come in through the mail, and they'll be tracked by it, especially as it'll be uncertain whether folks are at 6 weeks or beyond. Dr. Waitkevicz, I've seen your bio and in your discussion that you work a lot with communities of color, including the Hispanic community. How do language barriers affect folks knowing whether they're pregnant at 6 weeks or less, and abortion care generally?
Sorry. People who live in close-knit immigrant communities receive information about abortion from their communities, because many people have come from communities where either abortion is newly available in their country of origin, or there is a well-developed underground for abortion medications in their country of origin. Even Haitians know about medication abortion from their community. So it really depends where you are. If you're in an urban setting and you know a lot of people, you know. If you're out in the country, or if you're cut off for whatever reason, an abusive partner, geography, from a larger community where you can talk to other folks, then you don't know. It's not as much by ethnicity as by how large a person's community is, I would say.
Thank you. Es muy importante para la comunidad hispana para saber. Empieza en la 1 de mayo. Nosotros vamos a tener una prohibición en el derecho por aborto por todas las familias en Florida. Pero nosotros vamos a tener una oportunidad en 5 de noviembre para votar en una enmienda para un derecho constitucional por aborto. Y este necesita estar en una decisión por mujeres y sus familias y no para el gobierno. Gracias, and I yield back.
Muchas gracias a mi colega congresista Soto. Okay, forgive me now. Now I'd like to recognize my colleague and friend, Congressman Jared Maskowitz, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz. I want to thank my colleagues, Dan Kilday and Robin Kelly, for being here, as well as Leader Jeffries. Welcome to Broward County, the only county that voted Democrat in the last election, at least in South Florida. At least in South Florida. That's what I meant, in South Florida. I meant in the South Florida region. Okay. So a couple quick observations. What first is with what the Supreme Court. Well, first, thank you to the witnesses for being here, and thank you for sharing your stories. But one of the things that I find fascinating, but also very telling of the Florida Supreme Court, is that the 3 newest justices, the 3 newest people onto the court, 3 women appointed by the governor, all voted for the 6-week abortion ban, but then voted against letting the voters decide. So they voted to negate what voters in 1980 did. Okay, they said those voters were wrong, and then wanted to deny today's voters the ability to weigh in. And that's not just telling on this issue, it's telling for where the Supreme Court is going. That the Florida Supreme Court now has a tilt to the right, a more extremist view with the 3 newest people in a 4-3 decision. That's how close the decision was to allow voters to decide. So obviously we're stuck in this moment, but also the concern about where this court is going should another justice retire and the governor get another appointment. So I think that bears notice. It also bears notice that those justices are also on the ballot for retainment. So if the voters also want to show their displeasure to those justices for their vote, they could also weigh in November. I miss the days where my Republicans were for small government. It's amazing how they want government everywhere. And look, the last couple years here, we've had culture wars in Florida, and the culture wars have failed. They failed. They did not achieve the objective that they tried to achieve, but they have hurt a tremendous amount of Floridians in the process. Ms. Dorbert, I found your story very compelling, obviously, and tragic. Did your medical professionals tell you to get on a JetBlue flight and fly to New York?
My OB talked to me about it when she realized her hands were tied. She asked, what I thought about going out of state. From her standpoint, she said it'd be very costly. And she's like, she could not promise me there would be any legal repercussions. Yeah. And so that's kind of what she had told me and advised.
Right. And same thing, family, friends, all weighing whether you should literally get on a plane and leave the state where you live to go to another state to receive health care within the same country.
I mean, they all weighed in about going, but I had to think about my 4-year-old son at the time. How long would I be away from him? I've never left him more than a couple of nights. And obviously, whether healthcare was going to cover it, because right now I'm having a hard time healthcare covering just treatment now to help me. And so, and then finding a doctor in another state to do it safely.
Yeah. What did you, when your doctor sat you down and said, by the way, if you want this level of health care, my recommendation to you is possibly to get on a plane and go to another state. What did you think at that moment?
I was really shocked because I think I was still in a shock state once I found out he had Potters, and then I found out I had to carry the full term, and then she told me, there's the option of going out of state. She didn't advise it, but she just told me it's costly. She didn't know what the repercussions is, but if it was something I wanted, she would help. but she also said if I stayed here, that she would take good care of me to the best of her ability.
Thank you. I appreciate you coming today and telling your story.
Thank you, Congressman Moskowitz. Gentleman yields back. And now I yield to my colleague and friend, Congressman Maxwell Frost. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank the witnesses for being here, and thank you so much to my colleagues who flew from out of town to be here in the beautiful state of Florida, especially Leader Jeffries. Thank you for being here. You know, oftentimes we see leaders co-opt certain language and for political purposes, language or movements or culture. We see it all the time. I mean, one I like to point to is how the right wing has acts like they own Christianity and acts like they own the Bible. You know, I was raised Southern Baptist, and so I can't say enough of how frustrating it's been to see folks weaponize my religion and my faith to push a restrictive right-wing agenda. And not only do we see it with Christianity and religion in general, but we also see it with fundamental American beliefs and values. I want to do something real quick. I'm going to read 3 quotes. I'm not going to say who they're from. And I'd like you all to tell me whether you think it's a friend or foe of freedom and liberty or of the abortion access movement. So here's one. Quote, "We have to understand that the threats to freedom are not simply a result of what happens in legislatures. You got to fight to win." What do you think, friend or foe? Friend? Okay. It's Governor Ron DeSantis. Let me do another one. Quote, "In America, we believe in the majesty of freedom and the dignity of the individual." Friend or foe? Foe? Oh, you're catching on. That's former President Donald J. Trump. The dignity of the individual. Here's my last one. Quote, "We can either have a free society or we can have a biomedical security state. People are going to be free to choose and make their own decisions for themselves and their families." Friend or foe? Foe? Another Ron DeSantis quote. See, right-wing leaders in this state love to preach freedom, liberty, patriotism, and then they never back it up with action. So there's a lot of talk about freedom there from 2 prominent Floridians, right-wing Floridians. Ms. Dorbert, in the moments where you were with your doctor here in the state of Florida, and you were receiving the information that you got, did you feel that freedom?
No,
Did you feel that liberty?
no.
If we go back 5, 6 years ago, did you ever think something like this would be possible in this country or in this state? What happened to you?
No,
Why?
because I felt free.
You know, not only do they co-opt freedom and patriotism and liberty, but they also co-opt other things as well. Ms. Timmaraju, you are an organizer. You've been doing this work for a long time. Do you hate adoption?
Do I get adoption?
Do you hate adoption?
My children are adopted.
Oh, your children are adopted.
Yeah, actually,
Well, because
I
those on
suffered
the
from
right wing would make us.
endometriosis.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I suffered from endometriosis and I adopted my children.
Well, folks would have us believe that people like you and I hate adoption. I'm adopted.
That's right.
Myself. And I despise the fact that my identity and my story, and same thing with yours, is used by the right wing to try to restrict people's rights. Why do you think the right wing uses adoption a lot of times to help push this anti-freedom agenda?
Well, it fits into their, theological power and control, goals. But I'll say one thing, and I think you'll appreciate this about adoption. Before I adopted my children, I spoke to many adult adoptees. I wanted to understand their perspective on reproductive freedom and on abortion access because I knew what I did. Across the board, every single adult adoptee I said, I wish my birth parents had the freedom to decide. Across the board. Adoptees have been co-opted by this movement. The adoption narrative has been co-opted. Adoption is traumatic. It is not the silver bullet solution, despite what Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett asserted in the Dobbs discourse. It is not a solution to a lack of abortion access.
Thank you so much. Yes. I never knew my biological parents my whole life. I connected with my biological mother a few months before deciding to run for office, so just about 2.5 years ago. And when I was talking to her about the story and why she made the decision she made and what was sacred about it, what I got from that conversation is what was sacred about it wasn't just about the decision that she made, but about the fact that she got to make it. And so freedom, liberty, and patriotism isn't just about bald eagle, beer, and flag. It's about the people who live in the country. And so we'll continue to fight for bodily autonomy for all people here in the state of Florida and across the country. Thank you so much to our witnesses.
Thank you. Thank you, Congressman Frost. It would be interesting to run that question test with some of our colleagues in D.C. and see what they would come up with. Last but certainly not least, the man who will lead us to a pro-reproductive freedom majority in the United States House of Representatives, the leader, Hakeem Jeffries, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman Wasserman Schultz, for convening us for this incredibly important hearing here today. To all of my colleagues in government, to all of you in the audience who've joined us here today, and certainly to the witnesses for your time and your testimony here that will make a difference. And as Co-Chair Kildee indicated, our resolve going back to Washington is strengthened as it relates to making sure that we do everything in our power to protect a woman's freedom to make her own reproductive health care decisions and pass the Women's Health Protection Act. Mrs. Elidor, your testimony made clear that the abortion care issue is fundamentally about freedom, and we want to protect it. The extremists clearly want to take it away and impose government-mandated pregnancies, which is anti-freedom, as Congressman Frost pointed out and my other colleagues. Do you believe that Governor DeSantis and right-wing politicians should play any role in deeply personal reproductive health care decisions?
Absolutely not. By all costs, no.
And why is it problematic that MAGA extremists are trying to insert themselves in decisions that you clearly have indicated the government should play no role in whatsoever?
First of all, I'm African American. I'm a minority. I'm Haitian. I'm a woman. I already have everything stacked against me. And many people that are in the situation of IVF and all, this is the same thing we deal with. Just like you said, we are running out of doctors that actually deeply care, yet alone fighting now government officials that actually deeply care. So we need all the help that we can get. So the lack of medical providers is already a stake for us, but we're tired of fighting. Honestly, with IVF, and we're just simply tired of fighting because we're fighting every single day with our own bodies. Now I got to give the right to someone else to make that decision for me. That's not fair.
Well, we're here to make clear that we're going to fight with you and the people of Florida until we restore reproductive health care freedom.
Thank you.
And as I close, thank you, Ms. Dorbert, for your testimony here today, really taking the pain and doing all that you can to turn it into progress for the people of Florida. And your testimony was profound, it was powerful, it was poignant. The women of Florida here, of course, now face a cruel, a dangerous, and an extreme 6-week abortion ban. What is your message to the women and to the people of Florida?
I don't know.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your presence. Thank you for your powerful testimony. It has been personally moving to me, to I think all of us. Speaks for itself in terms of what has been unnecessarily and cruelly inflicted upon you, your son, your husband, and your family, and why it's so important for us to make sure that all of us collectively do everything that we can to ensure that the amendment that will be before the people of Florida restores a woman's freedom to make her own reproductive health care decisions in November. Thank you, and I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Leader Jeffries. Seeing no further questions for our panel, I want to thank each of them for taking the time to testify, to share your stories with us, to make sure that we draw clarity on what is at stake over the next 6 months until November 5th. The stories that you shared and the answers you provided will shape the work that we do and the policy decisions that we make, and it'll really stay with all of us. They'll inform the work that we do as we return to our respective districts and the Capitol to carry on the fight to ensure that every woman has access to the same care that we came to expect before Dobbs overturned decades of precedent. And Deborah, we are here to tell you that we are going to fight to make sure that no woman in the state of Florida and eventually the country ever has to be faced with the decision that you and your family had to face. Please know that. We will give you the voice that I know you struggle with. That's so incredibly important. So now, without objection, we thank the panel and the witnesses for joining us. You are dismissed. And we're going to take a moment to turn the room over and bring Secretary Becerra in front of us, and I will turn the gavel over to my colleague, Congressman Kildee, to introduce him as he comes to the table.
Thank you, Madam Chair. While the panel is shifting, I'm going to begin to introduce our next panel, which is Secretary Xavier Becerra. He is the 25th Secretary of the United States Department of Health and Human Services. He's a former Attorney General of California. And he is a former colleague from the House of Representatives. Mr. Becerra, a familiar face to this committee and to congressional hearings, has served our nation in a number of roles. His experience and familiarity with our work here will undoubtedly contribute to today's discussion. During his time in the House, Secretary Becerra served on the House Committee on Ways and Means and held numerous leadership roles, including assistant to the Democratic leader, former chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, and chair of the Democratic Caucus. Upon assuming his current role, Secretary Becerra inherited a dire situation amid the COVID-19 pandemic and has dedicated his time in office to expanding Medicaid and the Children's Health Insurance Program coverage for more than half the states in this country. He was key in reducing disparities in access to public health tools, curbing health care costs, advancing women's health, tackling gaps in who has access to health care as his big priorities. It's truly an honor to welcome Secretary Becerra to this hearing in South Florida. He's a friend of freedom. He's a friend of the fight that we're engaged in. And for many of us, he's just simply a friend. Xavier Becerra, welcome.
Mr. Leader, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, or Mr. Co-Chair, and to the members, it is first great to see you here. Thank you for doing this hearing. Thank you for giving witnesses an opportunity to speak the truth to what is occurring in America. And most especially, thank you to the witnesses for being willing to speak truth to what's going on in America. Much is happening in the world of healthcare. While President Biden has worked to expand access to healthcare, take, for example, the record number of Americans who have insurance today, more than 300 million, never before seen in this country, who now have access to a doctor or can take their child to a doctor and to a hospital and no longer worry if they'll go bankrupt as a result of doing so. While he is doing that, some places are restricting care. taking away rights and freedoms to the care Americans need. Right now, 23 million women of childbearing age live in states with abortion bans, including 4 million Floridians who are here today trying to make sense of yesterday's Supreme Court decision. It is important to hold this field hearing here in Broward County because the people of Florida know firsthand what it's like to have their rights limited. People like Deborah Dorbert and Sandra Elidor, who courageously shared their powerful, painful stories. It is important to be here today because we know that women and doctors are facing risks and threats to their life and well-being. That a 10-year-old rape victim must leave her home and her state of Ohio to receive the abortion care she needs. That a 13-year-old rape victim in Mississippi starts the 7th grade as a mom because she didn't get care when she needed it. That doctors, like my wife, Carolina, an OBGYN who specializes in high-risk pregnancies, are being forced to weigh legal opinions before rendering their medical opinions. That the 10 states with the highest maternal mortality rate have enacted abortion restrictions, leaving more women in deserts of care as providers are making the difficult decision to uproot their families and move to other states. That the medical students who are choosing not to establish their practice in states, sometimes their home states, that attack reproductive rights and healthcare, are perhaps now witnessing women who are going to have access to even less care in those states. And that our daughters, my 3 daughters, have fewer rights today than their mothers had. Today we're seeing extremists push the boundaries of how far they can go to regulate reproductive rights. In Alabama, they went after in vitro fertilization. Is contraception care next? Poet Robert Frost once said, "How many things have to happen to you before something occurs to you?" How many things have to happen to Miss Dorbert, Miss Elidor, before something occurs to us? President Biden, Vice President Harris, each and every one of you, we've all been working across government to expand rights and push back against these deeply unpopular and dangerous restrictions. We're protecting an American's right to privacy as a patient, but also as a provider. We've increased access to contraception through the marketplace under the Affordable Care Act and under Medicaid. Women now have access to the first over-the-counter birth control pill. And we are right now in the Supreme Court defending a woman's access to medication abortion. It has never been more important than today to take action to protect our rights and freedoms as Americans, especially our rights and freedoms to care for our own bodies. Just last week, I was at an event with Governor Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan, a state that passed laws to protect IVF and to decriminalize surrogacy, and where contraception and abortion access are enshrined in the state's constitution. Even where these rights are protected, people are scared, and I know, Congressman Kildee, you can attest to that back in your home state. I am grateful for Leaders Jeffries and all of your congressional leadership to restore women's rights and freedoms to the health care they need. But I am most grateful and proud for the courageous actions of our witnesses today. Their stories, their willingness to share their personal, private, painful experiences will lead the fight to restore our rights and freedoms to the care we each need. Madam Chair, women in America should not be living in medical apartheid in this country. We all have important work to do. Thank you for letting me be part of that.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for making the commitment to come down to South Florida to really help us shine a brighter spotlight on the issue that women are facing across this country of reproductive freedom that is not just about abortion. As we can see in the lawsuits that have been filed, in the decisions about IVF in Alabama and in places around the country, and your leadership, and it's just so good to see you as a former colleague, your leadership in the area of making sure that people have access to quality, affordable health care and that they can make their decisions with their family in the appropriate way without government interference is remarkable. And we're so lucky to have you and have you representing this administration in our country. So I want to thank the first panel of witnesses as well as the Secretary. I think we can all agree that the widespread movement against reproductive freedoms and a woman's right to choose has reached into each of our communities and will have a lasting negative impact for years to come. The stories we heard today were profound and moving, and we all had a chance to understand and learn firsthand how people in this state and across the nation are suffering under anti-abortion policies. I want to share something personal really quickly. Some of you may know that my twins, Rebecca and Jake, who are 24 years old, were conceived through IVF. We were told that that was the only way, when I was 29 years old, that we could become parents. 4 years later, we had our miracle child. My youngest daughter, Shelby, who is 20 today, Representative Bartleman is her godmother, and I didn't learn because we didn't know that we could conceive without assistance, that I was pregnant with her until I was 8 weeks pregnant. Thank God it was a healthy pregnancy, and she is, wonderful and having the time of life that a 20-year-old should have. But I was diagnosed with breast cancer several years after that, and I carried the BRCA2 mutation that increased the likelihood of my having breast cancer, and many other cancers that I was unaware of. That gene can be passed on to my children. And the miracle of IVF not only allows thousands and thousands of families to become families, but it also now provides an opportunity to end the generational cancer that exists in my family. Because one day, if my children decide to become parents and they carry that mutation, they can go through IVF and genetically test the embryos and implant only those that don't carry the BRCA mutation, ending cancer generationally in my family. And these reproductive freedom extremists would stop families like mine from ending the vicious cycle of cancer that threatens millions of lives. We cannot allow that. That's what's at stake for voters on November 5th. So I'm sorry to take a point of personal privilege. The Florida Supreme Court did a horrible thing yesterday, ripping away decades of abortion rights that were long recognized in our state constitution, but they also did the bare minimum. I don't really give them credit. They observed the Florida Constitution that says when enough voters petition to amend our rights, we voters all get a say in preserving our own freedoms. And that's what we need to do today to carry on in our generational fight for women's freedom. I want to thank my colleagues for joining us. I want to thank Leader Jeffries, whose committee the Steering and Policy Committee is. We are his designees as co-chairs, and look forward to the fight for November 5th to ensure, as I said, that we can establish a reproductive freedom majority in the U.S. House of Representatives, and field hearings like this will no longer be necessary. With that, the Steering and Policy Field hearing is adjourned. In a few minutes, we're going to do a brief press conference availability in this room, and so folks are welcome to stay, but if the people in the first 3 rows could move back a bit so that we can set up, that would be great. Thank you all so much for joining us.